Tonight's title will be, Who's Got Your Tongue? Good question, isn't it? Okay. So we're going to begin in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. These are the words of Jesus, and evidently he's speaking to some Pharisees. So before you all jump out of your chair, if I read this real strong, just out of the clear blue, it might make you think somebody was talking ugly to you. He said to them, he said, "O generation of vipers," that means son of snakes, How can you, being evil, speak good things? How can you? If you're evil, how can you speak good things? Well, there's your key right there. We learned something in that verse. For he says, "For out of the heart, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Okay, let's just look at that verse just a minute. Jesus is teaching us something here right that'll apply both ways. He's talking to some evil men, and he says to them, if you are evil, since you are evil, he said, if you being evil, he says, how can you speak good things if you're evil? And the reason it's impossible for an evil person to speak good things is because an evil person only has evil things in his heart, and it's out of the abundance of a person's heart that his mouth will speak. He goes on in verse 35 to explain this, the difference. You got both sides to it. The principle's still going to be the same. Verse 35. Jesus says, a good man, out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things. And an evil man, out of the evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. But I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak. Just right here make you hesitate to even open your mouth. He said every idle word that men shall speak. Sounds to me like he's including good and evil. He spoke about good men and evil men. And in verse 36 he said, every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words, okay, by thy words, let's change it and let's say by your words, you shall be justified, and by your words you shall be condemned. Now, looking at verse 37 for just a minute now, both of these things cannot be true of the same person. Do you see that? He says, so I'm going to read it in today's English so that you'll understand what he's saying. He's saying one of two things is going to happen to every man. By every man's words, by the words out of his own mouth, he's either going to be justified by the words that he's spoken, or he's going to be condemned. One of the two. If he's spoken good things, he's going to be justified. If he's spoken evil things, he's going to be condemned. That's serious, isn't it? This is a serious subject tonight. Who's got your tongue? Hope it ain't the cat. Okay? Let's leave right there and flip back real quickly so we don't waste a lot of tape to Proverbs 18:21. And we're going to find Proverbs 18:21, a law. This is a law of God. And I can't find Proverbs. There it is. Okay, Proverbs 18, verse 21. And this right here, keeping the verses that we just read that Jesus just taught us on, you'll see why he said what he did. Okay, and in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21 tells us that this is a law of God. And it reads like this, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Both death and life are in the power of the tongue. Okay? So really, if that was not King James backwards English, it would read, the power of life and or death are in the tongue. Okay? Do you see that? He goes on to say, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. And they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. Well, they that love life are going to eat the fruit of life. And they that love death, they're going to eat the fruit of that. Remember it says, if you sow to the flesh, to your flesh you'll reap corruption. Is that how it says? Close enough? So we want to keep this in mind. The power of life and death are in the tongue. Okay? And put that with what Jesus said. And then we're going to go back over into the New Testament to James chapter 1, verses 2 through 10. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 10. right after Hebrews. There it is. Might start. Okay, in the book of James, chapter 3 and verses 2 through 10, we'll read it straight through and then we'll come back and pick out a couple of items we want to look at. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, that same is a perfect man, being able also to bridle or to keep under control the whole body. Notice that phrase there, the same as a perfect man. Okay, we'll remember that when we come back to it. He goes on, he says, Behold, we put bits in the horse's mouth that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven by fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm. That's the steering wheel, like it would be in a car. Whithersoever or wheresoever the governor listeth, or wherever the governor, whoever's controlling that ship, wherever he turns that wheel, that's where that ship's going. Okay, now he's given us two examples. He's given us the examples of bits in the horse's mouth and the helm of a ship. And he tells us in verse 5, even so the tongue is a little member. He's talking about of your body, and boasteth great things. See, there's going to be a lot of pride come forth from your tongue. But behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. So you can just consider that the largest fire that's ever known, recorded in history, I think, was the Chicago fire, as far as I know. And it was started by a cow kicking over a lantern. That's what they say. And burned down almost the whole city of Chicago. See, it says, Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. Kindling. All it takes is a spark to start the largest fire. Verse 6, And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature. And he's talking about the course of nature now. He said it is set on fire of hell. The human tongue is set on fire of hell. Now he's not talking about the tongue of a man like Jesus was with the words he's speaking. He's talking about a natural, unregenerated, unborn again man in the natural. That's natural. That's a natural fallen state of man, that his tongue is set on fire of hell. Let's just look at this one line right here. It says, setteth on fire the course of nature. That means everything that'll ever take place in that man's life, that whole course, that path that his life's going to travel, is determined by words that have come out of his mouth. That's what it literally means. For every kind of beast, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea, is tamed or has been tamed. Right? Mankind has finally succeeded in taking dominion over all kind of animals, one way or the other, and has been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It's talking about the man cannot tame. Okay? A man can't. A natural man can't tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we God, even God the Father, and therewith with that same tongue curse we men which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. So we'll just stop reading right there. So far, Jesus has told us that every man is going to give account for every idle or empty word. That's what it means when he said you have to give account of every idle word. It means an idle word is any word that does not produce life to the hearer. Did you know that? That's what an idle word is, an empty word. If it doesn't produce life, if it's not God's word, if it's not something that edifies and builds up, then it's something that destroys. There is only two choices. There's no neutral. That's what he's saying. So we're going to, just real quickly, we'll go just pull out a couple little stories here, and we're going to find out about what happens. Remember, keeping in mind that we just read that the power of life and death is in the tongue. So words are pretty important. We know that God created all things by his word, right? So let's just go real quickly to Mark chapter 11, verse 23. We're just going to read one verse there. Mark 11:23. Okay? Now this is what we're looking for here. No matter what verses, what stories we read, what we're looking at is the fact that in every one of them, these people said words, spoke words. Okay? Here Jesus says, this is a principle of God. He says, for verily I say unto you, verily I say unto you, that whosoever, well that would include anybody, right? Shall say, whosoever shall say. Whosoever shall say, that's the two words you don't want to miss. Shall say unto this mountain, or that mountain for that matter, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith, shall come to pass, he shall have what? Whatsoever he said. Y'all see that? It's in there about 6 times. He's talking about the power that's in words. We already know that the power of life and death is in words. So that's all we're going to read on there. Now we're going to flip real quickly to Luke chapter 5, verses 17 through 25. Okay, verse 17. And it came to pass on a certain day, as he was teaching, that there were Pharisees and doctors of the law sitting by, which were come out of every town of Galilee and Judea and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. That means heal them all. The power was there to heal them all. And behold, men brought in a bed a man which was taken with a palsy, and they sought means to bring him in and lay him before him. But when they could not find by what way they might bring him in, because of the multitude, they went upon the housetop and let him down through the tiling with his couch into the midst before Jesus. And when he saw their faith, it takes some faith to go up here and take the top off his trailer and let somebody down through, wouldn't it? What did he say? It says, Jesus, he said, man, thy sins are forgiven thee. Okay? And the scribes, notice what Jesus said. He says, he said. And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, who is this which speaketh blasphemies? See, they're not mad at anything he done. They're mad at what he said. Do you see that? That's where they're getting angry, because of what he said. Who can forgive sins but God alone? But when Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answering said unto them, what reason ye in your hearts? All right, verse 23. Whither, that means which. Okay? Whither, which is easier. Which is easier? I'm going to read it like that. Which is easier? To say, thy sins be forgiven thee? Or is it easier to say, rise up and walk? Now see, if you don't look at that real close, you'll miss the question. He said, which is easier? To say this or to say that? The object of it's not what he said. He's telling them it's the matter of saying it. Okay? I mean, anybody can see you can see directly the two statements he's making. He's telling you that it takes the same, he's going to go on, he's going to tell you it takes the same power to heal somebody it does to forgive their sins. Right? But what most people don't see, and you can't see without the Spirit, is he's also teaching you that it was a matter of saying it. You could say, a truckload of watermelons is easy as you could say, it's going to rain tomorrow. See? It's a matter of saying it. Which is easier? Well, ain't no difference. Okay. But that you may know that the Son of Man, you see that phrase, the Son of Man, that's how he was referring to himself, hath power upon earth to forgive sins. He said, I'm going to do this so that you'll know that the Son of Man has power upon earth to forgive sins. Okay? He said to the man sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, arise and take. Now why didn't he say thy sins be forgiven? There. He said that what he's fixing to do is so that they'll know that he has the power to forgive sins, and he don't say again, thy sins be forgiven. He says, arise and take up your couch and go into your house. Because if his sins were forgiven or not, nobody could see. See, they didn't believe what Jesus said. He had already said, thy sins be forgiven. They didn't believe it because it was something you couldn't see. He said, so that you can know that when I said his sins were forgiven, I'm going to give you something that you can see. And then you won't have any excuse. You won't have an excuse. Right? He's saying that he already told them it's no difference. It's just a matter of saying it. So now he says, arise, take up, and immediately that man rose up before them, took up that whereon he lay, and departed to his own house, glorifying God. Of course, they were all amazed. We know they're always all amazed. Now, I want you to notice one, in verse 24, Jesus says, but so, I'm going to now change this into today's English. He said, but so that you all that hears me say this may know that the Son of Man hath power upon earth to forgive sins. Okay? The Son of Man, that's what I want you to look at. Well, in Greek, that is Ben Adam. Where they got Son of Man, it's Ben Adam. That means the offspring of Adam. That's what Ben Adam means, the offspring of Adam. Has anybody ever heard that before? That's what Son of Man means. Jesus always referred to himself as the Son of Man, right?
I never understand that.
It means Ben Adam, and Ben Adam means the offspring of Adam.
We're all offspring.
Now you got it. Think about that for a while. That's all we'll say about that. Ain't you an offspring of Adam?
Yeah.
You think about this about 3 o'clock in the morning. He's fixing to put the monkey on your back. I tell you what he's fixing to do. This old stuff of sitting around and watching somebody dying, saying, Jesus, come down here and lay your hand on them. That, you ain't got no excuse to do that because he told you to do it. That's ugly, ain't it? Did I get mean? I didn't mean to be mean. Where am I at? I want you to know that phrase. That's what it means. Offspring of Adam. Okay, we'll go to John chapter 14, verses 10 through 14. St. John, chapter 14. It's real easy to get into that, you know, you feel like you're being real humble, to say, well, you know, we got to pray and God will heal this guy. That's really not God's best. It's for you to ask him in some mysterious way to come and do something that he already told you to do. It takes a deep thought. It's real easy to put that out of your mind and forget it and go back to second best. But she's looking at me strange. Hope the tape's running. John chapter 14, verses 10 through 14. Okay. Okay, John chapter 14, verse 10. Believest? That's Jesus. We could back up a little, but he just said, they said, show us the Father, and he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? Now, in verse 10, John chapter 14, he said, believest thou not? In other words, don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father's in me? The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself. Okay? Would that include the words we just heard him say? When he said, thy sins are forgiven? Was he speaking that of himself, or was that God speaking it? When he said, take up your bed and walk, was that Jesus saying that, or was that God in him speaking it? Right here, what he said, the words that I speak not of myself, but their Father that's in me. In other words, they were his Father's words. So it's not really Jesus talking. It's not supposed to really be us talking. It's not really, we're not supposed to be alive. We're supposed to be dead. Jesus is supposed to be alive in us. Do you see the difference? We're supposed to be dead. That's what I don't think. Yeah. He said it, right? You see what I'm saying? It can't be us if we're dead. It's got to be Jesus. He's the one that's been raised from the dead, right? Everybody looking at me funny tonight. I must not be talking too good. Okay. Read this verse again. He said, believest not that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself. They're not my words, obviously. Then they must be his Father's words. We know from other places that they are. Then he says, the Father that dwells in me, he does the works. Well, you can look at that verse for about 2 minutes and see plainly Jesus is saying, I'm saying the words and God's doing the works. Okay? He said, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake. If you can't believe me because you believe me, then believe me because you saw these miracles. That's not asking a whole lot. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. Okay? Now where am I at on my paper? Or let's go, just hold that thought in your mind, that Jesus is trying to tell believers, he was talking to the disciples, that they was going to do the same things he did. Right? Well, when he was standing there in front of that man with palsy, he didn't pray and ask God to heal that man, did he? Well, John chapter 17, just turn over about 3 chapters. John 17, verse 18. We're just going to read one verse. Okay. We're going to read just verse 18 out of the 17th chapter of St. John. Jesus is talking to his Father about the disciples, and he says to his Father in heaven, he said, as thou hast sent me into the world, even so have I also sent them into the world. How? Just like God sent Jesus, Jesus turned around and sent them. He said it's the same thing, the same way. Now flip over real quickly, backwards, backpedal to Matthew, the last chapter. These are fairly easy references to find, which would be Matthew 28. We're going to read verses 18, 19, and 20. Okay? We know that this is after Jesus has been raised from the dead, and he came to them and spake and said, all power is given to me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach. Okay? See the word teach? You can use substitute for that word teach. And how could you teach somebody without words? You couldn't. You'd have to preach it or tell it or something. It's going to involve you saying something, right? And obviously, if you're going to teach what he's going to tell you to teach, it's going to be, you're going to be saying the Word of God. That's what we're looking for. Okay, teach all nations. This means all people, right? Baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Ghost. Okay, and part of what you're going to teach them is, verse 20, he says, teaching them to observe. Okay, see the word observe? That means to see how to do. To observe means to see how to do all things that I have commanded you. You see what he's doing? He's setting up a never-ending command. He told these 11 people things to do, and then the last thing he told them was, now you go into all the world and you show everybody how to do everything that I told you to go do. You see that? That's what he's saying. Which is what? Speaking. We know it's got to be speaking words of life. It's got to be speaking the words of God. It can't be speaking idle, evil words, right? Okay. Now we're going to back up. I don't even know what's here. Matthew chapter 21. Back up about 6, 7 chapters. Okay, verse 21. We're going to read 2 verses, 21 and 22. Now we're still looking at the power of the tongue is what we're talking about, okay? Jesus answered and said unto them, verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also, if you shall say, say. See the word? Say. That's the, we keep running into that. Unto this mountain be thou removed, be cast into the sea, it shall be done. Okay. That's the only verse we're going to read right there. That's what I want you to see. Jesus said, if you'll say. That's how he did it, right? He just did it to that fig tree. He cursed that fig tree and it withered and died. All right, now let's go to Mark chapter 5, verse 22. And this is a story. We won't read the whole story, but we just want to start reading. We're just going to read verse 22 and 23. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet, the feet of Jesus, and besought him greatly, saying, S-A-Y-I-N-G, saying, he said, this is what he said, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. That's what he said. He said, if you'll lay your hands on her, she shall live. That's what the man said, right? Y'all with me? Okay, so what words was he speaking?
Life.
He was speaking words of life. He said, if Jesus, the Son of God, the living Word of God, will come and lay his hands on my daughter, she shall live. Well, he's not speaking nothing about death. He said she'll live. So he's speaking words of life. Right on, we'll just drop down a couple of verses here, and we'll see that in verse 25, it tells about this woman with the issue of blood, right? And she come out there, and they were all going to Jairus' house. And when she heard of Jesus, came in the press behind and touched his garment. For, verse 28, she said, see, she had said, if I just may touch his clothes, I shall be whole. She said, see the power in her words? That's what I'm trying to get you to see. It's the power of life and death is in the tongue, and what we're doing here is just seeing some people that spoke words of life. Okay? Okay, we're in Mark. Now, chapter 7, we're just going to read verses 11 through 16. Okay? It tells us that God judges the righteous, and God is angry with the wicked every day. If he, the wicked, turn not, God will whet his sword, and he hath bent his bow and made it ready. In other words, it's always ready. He hath also prepared for the wicked, the instruments of death. God has ordained his arrows against the persecutors. Behold, the wicked travaileth with iniquity. He travaileth with it. Man, he just can't. He's like going to give birth. He just can't. He's got to find a place to put his evil on. Hunting all the time. And hath conceived mischief. Well, where do you suppose he'd conceived it at? Where do you conceive? Where would evil be born? It'd be born in your heart, right? That's where Jesus said. And if it was born in your heart, and it, that was the only thing that was produced in your heart, eventually your heart would become full of evil, right? It would be in there in abundance, and then it would come out your mouth, right? Okay. Okay, verse 14. Behold, he, the wicked, travaileth with iniquity, and hath conceived mischief, and brought forth falsehood. He, the wicked, hath made a pit, and digged it, and is fallen into the ditch which he made. I'm telling you now that the evil things that the wicked person plans for God's people is most of the time will wind up being their own judgment, right? Because remember what we start out with, Jesus said, every man will be judged by his own words, justified or condemned. Okay, now we've looked at some of the good things that people said and saw that it produced life. Now we're going to see a story here about some wicked things that somebody said and see what it produced. Okay, his mischief, verse 16 is the main one I want you to get here. His mischief, it's talking about the wicked man. His mischief shall return upon his own head. See, that's the law of God. God set it up that way. The wicked's mischief shall return upon his own head, and his violent dealing shall come down upon his own P-A-T-E. I don't know exactly what that means. Well, that's what I think it means. Okay? So we're going to stop reading right there and turn to the book of Esther. Okay, we're in the book of Esther, in chapter 1. And there was this king, which is coincidental, I won't even pronounce his name. Ahasuerus or something. That's neither here nor there. He was a king, and there were many Jews in the nation that he governed, right? So there came a day they were having this great feast, and so they had this feast last about a week, and finally he invited his queen. Her name was Vashti. And so as it turned out, in verse 12 it tells you, but the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him. See, because the king sent and told his queen, come on to the party, and she wouldn't come. So his advisors got together. The names are not important again. It's what they said, really. And they got to thinking about it, and they said, this is not going to be very good, because if the queen can disobey the king, then pretty soon every woman in the nation is going to not pay any attention at all to her husband. And this could cause a lot of problems. And so they said, we've got to come up with something. So and let's go down to verse 19. And this was the idea they come up with. They said, if it please the king, let there go forth a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the law of the Persians and the Medes, that it may not be altered. In other words, this is going to be a law that cannot be changed, that Vashti no more can come before the king, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she, because of the fact that he'd called her and she wouldn't come. So the only thing we need to say about that is that even before this bad situation that we're going to get into happened, God already knew about it. He knew what was coming. We can all understand that. And what God is doing here, He is putting His people in key positions where it's going to be necessary for them to be in order to accomplish His will. So you all understand what I'm saying? He's getting His people in place before the need even arises, right? That's like having the supply before the need. So anyway, they said that's good, and so they made this law, and they sent it out all over the land. And so then they gathered a bunch of fair young virgins and brought, for the king to pick between, and so they were going to just kind of set them up in their own little house, and they would each take turns going, to the king, and let him finally pick out which one he really liked. So they did. And among these virgins, there was one named Esther, okay, and she had, her mother and father had died, and she'd been raised by, I believe, her uncle was, we'll just say he was her uncle, and his name was Mordecai. He was a Jew, okay, and he had raised her because her mother and father were dead. So anyway, Esther came among these maidens, and so anyway, after the king had saw her and met her, she was very fair to look at and everything, and he preferred her over all the others, so he gave her the best place. And every day, her uncle, Mordecai, who was a Jew, he walked every day up there by the king's court to see how Esther was doing. And we're now in chapter 2, bottom of verse 15, and it says, and Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. And in verse 17, it tells us that the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Okay? Now, there's something you want to keep in mind through this story. Mordecai had commanded Esther not to reveal to this king her nationality or from what race of people she was. That was very important that he didn't know. So she did as her uncle who had raised her, Mordecai, told her. So in those days, it says in verse 21, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of these king's servants, calls them chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, they were wroth and sought to lay hands on the king. In other words, they intended to kill him. And the thing was made known unto Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and then Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. In other words, she went and said, now, this man, Mordecai, has told me he's overheard this plot to take your life by these two men. In verse 23 tells us, and when they made inquisition of this matter, it was found out. Therefore, both of these men were taken and hanged on a tree, and was written down in the book of the Chronicles. So, now, chapter 3. Now remember I told you God put His people in there before they were needed. So what happens here in chapter 3 really has no bearing on Esther. But this is something God knew was going to take place. He knew that this wicked man in this kingdom was going to be exalted. Okay? And it tells us, after these things did the king, I'm going to say it like that so I won't have to keep repeating that name, promote Haman, Haman, the son of whoever it was, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And of all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. In other words, he's made him second in his kingdom, right? But Mordecai, Esther's uncle, bowed not, nor did him reverence. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's commandments? Now it came to pass when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not. In other words, he would not listen, he would not bow before this wicked man. So they finally went and told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. Now they'd found out Mordecai is a Jew. Verse 5, and when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And I wrote in my Bible, the devil's mad, because that's just who this guy turns out to be, the very devil. Verse 6, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought not only to destroy Hezekiah, but to destroy all the Jews. See, just because he hated this man, because this man wouldn't bow and worship him as God, he decided he'd not only destroy him, but everybody of that nationality. Now that's evil. Is that evil, man? Okay, that were throughout the whole kingdom. Now, so he's got to come up with a plan. In verse 8 we'll see Haman's, this wicked man's plan. And Haman said to the king, there's a certain people scattered abroad here throughout your kingdom, right? And he said this about them. He said, their laws are diverse from all people. Neither do they keep the king's laws. Wherefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them, or to allow them to even live. He says, if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of business. In other words, he's offering, I have here it says $19.5 million he was going to pay to have all the Jews in that whole land destroyed for money, the love of money, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand. That means his authority. He gave him his authority, it says, and gave it unto Haman the son of whoever it was. I'm not going to repeat all them names. And the king said unto Haman, I'm in verse 11, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. So he gave him the legal right to kill all Jews. Right? Then were the king's scribes called, and they wrote this commandment down, see, and sent it into all the provinces. And it was written that on a certain day, let's go to verse 13, and the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces, that they would destroy and kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even on the 13th day of the 12th month. Okay? And to take the spoil of them for a prey. In other words, going to kill all the people and take all their money on a certain day. A copy of this writing was sent to every province and published to all the people so that they'd be ready. When the day comes, there was next July the 4th, we're going to kill all the Jews. Now, ain't that something? That is something. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan, which there was a lot of Jews in that place, they were perplexed. Okay, now chapter 4, when Mordecai perceived all that was done, he found out about it. Mordecai rent his clothes, put on sackcloth with ashes, and went into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none could enter into the king's gate while clothed in sackcloth. In every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews. In other words, this like they posted this in the post office, man, on the 13th of this certain month, we're going to kill every one of you. So they was all weeping and fasting. Verse 4, so Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved. Now the only thing they've told her so far is that Mordecai is out there weeping. That's why I read it. So she was grieved, and she sent raiment out to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth, but he would not receive it. So then Esther called Hatak, one of the king's chamberlains, and she sent him out to Mordecai to find out what was going on, see. Verse 6, so Hatak went forth to Mordecai, and Mordecai told him in verse 7 of all that had happened, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also, he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and here's what he tells her to do, to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king, and make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for all her people. Remember now, the king does not know she's a Jew. Now, let's just go and read it straight down, verse 10. And Esther spake to Hatak, and gave him the commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man nor woman, shall come into the king's court, the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death. In other words, even the queen couldn't come into that inner court unless she was invited by that king. except such to whom, unless, there was only one exception. If you went in there, it says, unless the king would hold out his golden scepter, that they may live. And she goes on to say, but I have not been called to come in unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. In other words, if this thing goes to pass, sooner or later the king's going to have you put to death too, because that law can't be changed. You know what I mean? It's all Jews. There ain't no exceptions. Verse 14, he says, for if thou altogether hold thy peace, if you won't go, do. If you won't go do what I'm telling you to go do, intercede for your people and plead for your people, he said, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews. He said, they're still going to get delivered. So God's going to send somebody, he said, but from another place. He said, but you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether or not you just came into this kingdom for such a time as this. This may be the very reason God put you here. And it was. Then Esther bade them return to Mordecai this answer. She sends back to Mordecai and tells him this. She says, go and gather all the Jews that are present in this whole city and go and start fasting and neither eat nor drink 3 days and 3 nights. She said, me and my maidens will do likewise. And then I'm going to go in with the king. Which is, in other words, I'm going in there without invitation. And she says, if I perish, I perish. In other words, if he kills me, according to the law, I'm going to die. If he holds that scepter out, then I'll live. She said it didn't make no difference. She was going in to make her plea. So Mordecai went his way, and he did what she commanded. Now, okay, so now in chapter 5, Esther goes into this king's court. Verse 2, and it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that means in the inner court, that she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to her the royal golden scepter, which was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. So that meant life. Then said the king, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given thee even up to half the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it seem good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto a banquet that I have prepared. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So she told the king that my request is, I want you and Haman to come to a banquet that I've got prepared. See, now this is God. He's setting up a trap. Right? And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, what is your petition? And it shall be granted. What is your request? All right, then answered Esther and said, my petition is this. Verse 8, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. So old Haman, he was thrilled. See, he was one of them people that run around up with the people that could help him. See, he was always following the king around, you know, trying to get elevated himself. You know how people do? I think they call them brown nosers. Right. That's what old Haman the brown noser. So he went home, and he was just real happy with a glad heart. And when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he didn't stand up, right, nor moved for him. He wouldn't even get out of his way, more or less bow. He was full of indignation. It just reminded him again, I'm going to kill all them Jews, you know, and Mordecai too. It made him mad. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, because, see, he done got that evil law passed. It's just a matter of time, you know, and he's feeling pretty good. He goes on home. He tells his wife, he's bragging in verse 12. He goes home and he's telling his wife about this big invitation he's got to this party. He says, only people invited is me and the king. You know, really, I'm really going to do something. And in verse 13, he remembers Mordecai, and he said, yet all this avails me nothing. As long as I see that Mordecai, the Jew, sitting in the king's gate, I can't really enjoy it. You know, it's just griping, or I've got to kill him. Then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak unto the king when you're at this big party, right? You got him in a good position, right? Speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon, and then go thou in merrily with the king. In other words, then go on about your banquet. King's going to give you anything you want because you in good with him. See, you brown nose number one. That's what he said. So this pleased Haman, made him think this is a good deal. That's a good idea. So that night before, the night before this feast, it says the king, he couldn't sleep. So he commanded the book of records, you know, where everything was written down, he got out last week's newspapers, or last year's, and he said, read these things to me. And it just so happened that they read this account where Mordecai had been the one that saved the king's life by telling him about this plan. And so in verse 3, the king says, well, what honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this, for saving my life? What's been done for him? Then said the king's servant, there's nothing been done for him. Oh, and the king said, who is in the court? He hears somebody coming in. Now Haman was come to the outward court to speak to the king, to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared, right? And the king's servant said to him, behold, Haman standeth out in the court. And the king said, well, let him come in. In other words, I need somebody here. So Haman came in, and the king, Lord's got this set up beautiful. This is slick. This is slick. And the king said to Haman, what shall be done unto the man, or what should be done unto a man, the man, whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his own little elevated, prideful heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than himself? So he thought, the king is fixing to really put it on me. And he even asked me, what do you think I ought to do to a man that I would really like to honor? So Haman answered the king, and he said, well, for the man who the king delighteth to honor, he said, I think you should put on the royal apparel, right? And the horse that the king rides on, and the crown that sits on your head, I think y'all just give him everything, right? That's pretty slick, wasn't it? And let this, he said, he just goes on and on about it, and let him ride through the streets and proclaim before him, thus shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honors. He's got himself all set up. So then the king said to Haman, well, make haste then, run out and take this apparel and the horse and everything. And he said, go do all this to Mordecai the Jew. Oh, man. Oh, well, Haman was really hot, but he didn't have no choice. So he went out there and he did all this stuff, and he went home and told his wife about it. And she says, uh-oh. She said, if Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but thou shalt surely fall before him. Okay, so while they were yet talking, they come and told Haman, come on, it's time for this feast with you and Esther and the king. So the king said to Esther on the second day at the banquet, says, what is your petition? What shall you desire? Said, anything you want up to half the kingdom, I'll give it to you. So then Esther says, well, if I have found favor in thy sight, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold. Now listen to this. He still don't know she's a Jew, right? She says, we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king answered and said to Esther, who is he and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? In other words, who's going to destroy you and your people? See, he don't know she's a Jew. And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked man Haman. Boy, old Haman's heart come right up in his throat then. Then Haman was afraid before the king. Boy, and the king was mad. And it says the king rose up and went out of the room in his wrath, and he went out into the garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther. Now he knows which side his bread's buttered on, don't he? He's going to beg Esther. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace guard into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman had fallen upon the bed where Esther was. I guess she was laying in the bed, and he fell on the bed. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in my own house? I'm just changing these words so it makes more sense. As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, go hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Okay, so we'll just shorten this up. I think I'm about running out of tape. All right, we just sum this up, heard what Haman said. He spoke these evil words, right, that came out of an evil man's heart. He spoke them. He was judged by them. He was condemned by them, and he had to eat them, right? He was hung by the very same thing. And this is God's way of getting his judgment on wicked people. It just take only thing he has to do is just take the words, the evil that they plan for God's people, and that's the very thing. See, it's automatic. It's automatically going to come back on them. There's an old saying, something about what goes around comes around, and something about what goes over the devil's back. Have you ever heard it? I can't never quote it, but it's in the
It goes right under a lot of
it's in the Bible, something about that. But that's the gist of the story. See, God set it up automatic where every man really is determining his own destiny by whether or not he's speaking words of life or words of death. Right? So the power of life and death is in the tongue, and then nobody's going to make you speak evil. Nobody's going to make you speak words of life. God won't force you to, to speak this, and He certainly don't want you to speak evil. He just told you what the results would be, depending on what comes out of your mouth. So the question is, the answer to the question, and who's got your tongue? The answer depends on what's coming out of your mouth. You can listen to what you're saying, and you know who had hold of your tongue when you said it. I rest my case.